The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this episode are that of the guest and host and do not necessarily reflect the values of sponsors or other associated organizations. Welcome to the Parental Compass. I am your host, Bobby Williams. As I usually say at the start of the episode, please like, share, subscribe, leave a comment. If you subscribe to us on Spotify or Apple Music, they'll notify you every Wednesday when we drop a new episode. We're getting into a serious topic today. We'll be talking about when a family member is struggling with addiction. Anyone who has ever been there knows how personal it can feel and just how truly frustrating it can be. Our guest is Kassie Jadin. Kassie is involved in this issue pretty much every day. She leads the PCAP Program, Parent-Child Assistance. And what they do is they work with new mothers who are dealing with major addiction challenges. So very important work in our community. We're going to get into Kassie in just a second, but first, here's a quick word from our sponsor, AmeriGroup. We're all filling a lot of different roles in life: parent, coworker, friend. Well, AmeriGroup offers whole care for the whole you. It's all covered: doctor visits, prescriptions, extra vision benefits, and even help gain your GED. Visit chooseamerigroup.com/WA. It was interesting when we were talking before. You were telling me like you'll even visit people who are living on the streets, or you're going to tents, or you're wherever they're at is where you are.
Absolutely. Especially given the current circumstances of everybody's life, a lot has changed in the last year, but you can't build a relationship of trust with somebody if you are holding judgment on them, right? So if we're a home visitation study, if someone's home is a tent or a trailer, then that's where we go. That is their home. In order for us to, help them, we need to know what their life is and what they're experiencing and what those barriers are.
Yeah. Well, today we're talking about when a family member is struggling with addiction. And the first thing that came to mind when I was thinking about this is how we can intellectually know, like, okay, this is how you deal with an addict. This is the right thing to do. But it's so different when it's someone you care about as much as a family member.
It really is. Working with our clients, it is difficult and amazing, and you get to see them, succeed. There's a level of difference when it's a family member. I don't live with my clients. Their decisions don't affect me personally, whether it's housing, financial responsibilities. So when that is in the family and in the home, it just compounds a whole nother level of stress on the family.
So much, yeah. Well, another central idea I hear around addiction is the person has to be willing to make a change. But what about if someone's not willing to make a change, if they're just not ready? When are you helping and when are you enabling? Like, where's that line there?
Yeah. So, I think there's a couple different things you touched on there as far as being ready to make change. I can be ready for my client or my family member to make change all day, but if they're not, it's not going to matter, and it's really important to understand how the stages of change work. In order to make change, you can't just go one day like, oh, all these new habits are going to develop. There really is that pre-contemplation, that like planning, the what ifs, and then kind of moving to that contemplation and so on, so that when they are ready to change, they know that you're there for them. It may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but when they finally say, I've had enough, and they're ready to even just attempt to make the change, that they know that they have that family support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like planting those little seeds, or sometimes things may not feel like they're making a difference, but maybe that is the first piece of someone eventually becoming ready. I think with addiction too, there's just so much shame around it. Like you feel bad, you have this struggle, and then the shame can almost fuel the addiction and make things worse, or it's just
Right.
perpetuating on itself. How can you start to lessen the shame or address that?
Sure. I mean, personally, one of my biggest goals is really to make this just a normal conversation. People aren't ashamed to talk about diabetes or, heart disease. And addiction really is a disease. And so when we're looking at this as like shameful and hiding it, all we're doing is making it harder for everybody in the family, in the community, and just being able to speak with people, speak with your families with dignity and just unconditional positive regard for them, even if you don't understand why or how they got to where they're at, just not making them feel like it is something they need to be ashamed of or that they need to hide. And just, I'm not saying just be okay with it, but just telling them that you're there or you understand. Maybe I don't understand why you're doing it or how you're doing it, but I understand that I love you and I'm going to be here when you're ready to change.
Yeah, it's just difficult too because their behavior is frustrating. So how can you keep warm energy when you are feeling like legitimately angry or
Yeah.
upset?
I mean, that is really, really the difficult part, especially when we're looking in families and in homes, in those little nuclear family structures. Really setting boundaries is going to be the most important thing. If it is mom, dad, grandma, a kid, even, I mean, we are getting teens, who are struggling with addiction, just
Hmm.
having those boundaries, not saying that you have to cut anybody out of your life, but if your boundary is you can't, be here while you're actively using, you have to hold that boundary. If you don't, then there are no boundaries, right?
Hmm.
It's just like a kid or a dog. Once they get what they want, they're going to continue to do that because it's easy. And it's just important. And I would say for your own self-care, and just respect for yourself, having those boundaries and being able to hold them and just be ready when that person is willing to accept those boundaries and those changes is
Yeah.
it's yeah.
Well, what if you have like a teenager or something? You obviously don't want to be kicking your teenager out of the house, but they still have an issue they need to address. Are there any like first steps, or it just seems different when it's your child?
Right, absolutely. And it is. I mean, I would say, and it's going to depend on the family and the age. I mean, the
Oh,
first step is always to reach out to somebody, especially if you don't have any experience with, addiction or mental health or counseling. Find somebody that you or your kids trust. Maybe that is just your primary care doctor, and it's just, hey, we trust them enough to be like, what do we do? Where
uh-huh.
do we go? Get those referrals. So much of the success in people fighting addiction is having supports and community engagement and just programs that are there to help.
Hmm. I liked we were talking before, and you were talking about a kid having their spark, or that's a way to combat addiction. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's actually something that I learned at my time at Fest with Scott Hanauer. He does a really amazing trauma-informed care
Uh-huh.
presentation. And it's something that has been on my mind a lot. We have kids at home, and sometimes keeping them motivated or interested in something is incredibly difficult. But really, a lot of times with addiction, it just becomes all consuming, all
Like
of the
that is your
time.
identity, and
Yes, right. And so, especially with kids, giving them something to do that they're interested in, that they're not just the kid who smokes pot down the road. Maybe they're the kid that skateboards all the time, or maybe they play music. maybe they want to get into 4-H. I mean, animals, equine therapy, there's a ton of things, and every kid is going to be different, but just starting to get them engaged, even if it doesn't work out the first time, is going to be a step to just giving them some distraction, keeping them busy and interested in something that maybe gives them enough, hope that there's a reason to not use substances.
Yeah. It's tough because it seems like a lot of kids aren't really into the idea of talk therapy too. So having other things makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And, everybody has their own level of resiliency and their own life experiences. Nobody is the same. And, I don't really know a lot of people who just became addicts out of the blue.
Mm-hmm.
There's almost always, a family history, genetic history, a large history of trauma that really affects, and finding that root cause is going to be a huge help to fighting the addiction. The addiction really is there as kind of just that cover up most of the time. So getting into the talk therapy, equine, getting them into music therapy, whatever that looks like for your family or your kid, is going to be a huge help at them kind of being willing to survive per se without using substances.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it is a gene thing? Like some people are predisposed to becoming addicts?
I mean, we certainly know that there are some links, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. We know that if you are prenatally exposed to alcohol, that is more likely to happen. And so, I mean, there are absolutely links.
Mm-hmm.
It's also hugely environmental. I mean, kids, monkey see, monkey do, right? Little kids in those 1 to 3 years old, where they're really developing and they're learning all of their life characteristics. They're learning who they are and how everything works. And they're seeing maybe mom or dad or grandma drinking or smoking, whatever that looks like. It becomes, a part of their environment and a part of what they think is acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's so many different layers to, whether you have trauma, whether it's, a environmental and learned, whether there are some genetics in there, and then, just mental health in general is a huge cause of substance use. People tend to self-medicate, especially as they get older.
Yeah, it's more like the addiction is the symptom and the pain you're feeling inside is the real kind of disease you got to address in a way.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. What about weed? Like someone who smokes weed throughout the day, they could argue like, well, I'm functional. Does weed count, or what do you think about all that?
I mean, certainly in our program, we consider marijuana a mind-altering substance, drugs, alcohol, marijuana. It becomes kind of a tricky subject, especially here in Washington, since it has become legal. Certainly, in my opinion, I consider it drugs. Certainly, I wouldn't want any kids, especially in, our brains are not really fully developed until we're mid-20s. And so anything that you are going to be putting into your body that could potentially affect that development is, in my opinion, not a great idea. And there are certainly plenty of studies that kind of are backing that up, but it really is new compared to the studies we have on, cocaine and heroin, because marijuana is fairly new to the market of being legal. And what does that look like for it to be so accessible?
Yeah. I feel like people treat it like it's a pretty innocent thing in general.
Yeah.
Well, having a family member that's dealing with something like this, it just seems so taxing on the rest of the family too, or everyone else is feeling that struggle. What can families do to take care of themselves while this is happening?
Yeah. I mean, self-care is a huge part of survival. I would say, especially right now, given that we're in a pandemic,
Mhm.
um, a large portion of our families are home all the time with the rest of their family members.
Yeah,
Kids are not in school. And so a lot of people, like, maybe their relief or is going to work. Maybe they have that coworker at work that they get to talk to. Maybe they just get to get away, you know. For example, I have played roller derby for 10 years. It gets my
cool.
body moving. I get to get some aggression out. I get to be around a large group of really amazing women who support me. And I haven't been able to do that for a year. That is just, it has been a whole new level of how do I figure out how to get my needs met that I was doing before. And so just, I mean, absolutely have to prioritize self-care, whether that looks like going for a walk every day or taking a nap on Saturdays. I mean, you have to fit it in with what is available right now, which is really difficult, especially if you are a social butterfly person. But
Mhm.
I mean, I know at the beginning of this, we have at Family Education Support Services, we did a Zoom karaoke night just so we could socialize and laugh together. And it was huge in just getting our minds off of everything that was going on.
Yeah. It seemed like when COVID first hit, everyone's life took a collective step down. And if you were sort of teetering or struggling to begin with, that extra step down just made it really, really hard.
Yeah. Well, and especially, I mean, you add, the economic financial burdens at this point
Mhm.
with families losing their jobs. So many families, kids were getting fed at school,
Sure.
going to have one meal a day for dinner to now all three and snacks all day and school. It's a lot, and it's a lot to bear for anybody. But when you put that extra bit on someone who's already struggling with addiction or a family that's already struggling with addiction, it can really go downhill quickly if you don't have the right supports.
Yeah. So just being able to reach out to those supports is so important. And it's so isolating too, just having to be stuck at your house if you're not out working or doing something. Do you have any closing messages of hopes or ideas that we haven't covered that you want to share with our audience?
I mean, nothing specific. I would just say, I mean, take care of yourselves and just remember that there are millions of other people struggling with the same thing, and just be kind to each other. It is so important to just have that unconditional positive regard and support for people and each other, no matter where we're coming from, and that we're just all in this together.
Yeah. I think just being able to get to that place where you can feel good with yourself, not because of any external thing, but just because you're a human being. That's
Right.
like one of the main goals in life is just having that comfort inside, you know?
Yeah. Yep.
So, well, thanks so much for taking the time to be here with me today. I really appreciate it, Cassie.
Yeah, thank you. It was great to see Florida and meet you in person, and I appreciate it.
Again, just thank you, Cassie. And thank you for all the important work you're doing in our community. I'm sure that all the families you're serving they're lucky to have you on their side. That's our show. On behalf of Family Education and Support Services and AmeriGroup, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week. Peace.